Wrapping up another live look over the Supreme Court building at this hour as we follow all of the latest information that is coming in on this big story. The Supreme Court making it clear that the tariffs there are taxes. That is a huge loss to President Trump, who described all of this as, quote, life and death. As I mentioned, you're going to hear me get quiet a little bit here as I'm reading through all of the different information coming in. You saw me hold up those documents, and you could see it's not as lengthy as you might expect, but still fairly lengthy. A lot of different pages that we do have to go through here. Now, the Supreme Court ruling comes despite a series of short-term wins on the court's emergency docket that allowed Trump to push ahead with extraordinary flexes, as I mentioned, on those executive powers. We're talking about high-profile firings, major federal funding cuts, a lot of different topics. The tariffs decision doesn't stop President Trump from imposing duties under other laws, though. While there have been more limitations on the speed and severity of Trump's actions, top administration officials have said they expect to keep the tariff framework in place under other authorities. The Constitution gives Congress the power to levy tariffs, but the Trump administration argued that a 1977 law allowing the president to regulate importation during emergencies also allows him to set tariffs. Other presidents have used the law dozens of times, often to impose sanctions, but Trump was the first president to invoke it for import taxes. And that ruling, by the way, I think I forgot to mention it here, that was a 6-3 court decision that came out literally just about 15 minutes ago. Trump set what he called reciprocal tariffs on most countries in April of last year, almost a year ago, to address trade deficits that he declared a national emergency. Those came after he imposed duties on Canada, China, and Mexico, addressing, he says, a drug trafficking emergency. A series of lawsuits followed that, including a case from a dozen largely Democratic-leaning states and others from small businesses selling everything from plumbing supplies to education toys to women's cycling apparel. And the Associated Press here, as we continue to follow all of this, saying breaking, the Supreme Court strikes down President Trump's sweeping tariffs, upending the central plank of his economic agenda. Follow the latest for updates. And that is what we're doing here as we take a look through all of those documents here. Again, this is a huge story as President Trump's tariffs have essentially been invalidated, with the Supreme Court calling this unlawful. This was a ruling, as I mentioned, 6-3 against the Trump administration on the Global Tariff Authority in a decision that was actually authored there by Chief Justice Roberts. No question that was likely to be the case, considering we are talking about one of the biggest cases here the Supreme Court would rule on during this session. They had until June to make that ruling, and as you can tell, they chose to make the ruling a bit earlier here, releasing that at the end of February versus the end of June, potentially the early part of July, as we've seen in the past. And of course, we are working to get our guest here on right now. So if I get quiet, I do apologize. But again, this right here, these are the documents that are just coming out from the Supreme Court, all related to this decision. And as I mentioned, it's not necessarily as long as you might expect. However, still a very lengthy opinion that is coming in here. So we have crews that are reading through all of it, trying to piece together some of the most important portions of it. As we get those different portions here, we are going to read them for you. And of course, as I mentioned, we'll have an expert join us to explain really what all of this means and break it down for us. But right now here, you are taking once again a live look outside of the Supreme Court building, where it is not even nearly as busy as it is on most days. It looks like the weather, though, is not that great. Normally, you'd see different protesters, demonstrators, activists who are out there protesting any decisions that might come down. But as of this point, haven't really seen much of anything outside of that building. I want to pop this up on your screen because as this information is coming in, there's always a question about how the Dow and the stock market are going to react overall. And as you can see there, the Dow starting off the day in the red. That was when it opened around 9:30 this morning. However, here, almost an hour later, that decision came out at 10 o'clock. And as it came out, we actually saw the Dow jump back into the green. It's kind of teetered between that, but right now the Dow is up 0.3%, which is about 150 points. So the Dow, of course, is going to react throughout the day to this news from the Supreme Court, all related to Trump's tariffs there, including essentially those tariffs on several of the U.S. trading partners.
Cayce Myers is going to join you.
Awesome. We do have our friend here, Cayce Myers, who works with Virginia Tech. He is big on this show. We always bring him in to discuss all of the latest information here. So he's going to join us momentarily, and he can kind of break down what this says, what the next steps are, because that is going to be a big question. Essentially, what happens next? Where do we go from here? There are likely to be more legal challenges that happen as a result. Cayce can help kind of explain that and tell us what that really means. Right now, as I mentioned, we are working to get him on here. So once we do, we will bring him on live and he'll help explain what really this process means, but also what it means that this decision came down from a Supreme Court in which we had several of the justices that were actually put in place there, nominated by President Trump during his last time in office. That was, of course, the first time that he was elected. We're talking about the last time. That's when he appointed those different justices. We also have this reaction coming in. No question there's going to be a lot of reaction that pops up here in the coming minutes and hours. But Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker saying Donald Trump implemented the largest tax hike in decades on working families, and the Supreme Court just found it illegal. Tariffs aren't paid for by the other country. They're paid by you. Relief is finally coming, and it's no thanks to this president. Again, we expect we're going to get all kinds of information as well as different reaction that comes in from all over. But important to note here, the Supreme Court has struck down the Trump tariffs that have been discussed a lot. They are far-reaching global tariffs, handing him a significant loss on an issue crucial to his economic agenda. Right now, I do want to bring in a great friend of the show. We do have Cayce Myers over at Virginia Tech joining us here to discuss really what all of this means and the political implications. Cayce, thank you so much, as always, for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And first off, the big question that a lot of people are going to be asking here is, what does this ruling really mean? But also, what does it mean for Trump and his political future?
Well, I think that this is very much a question around what is the next few years of the Trump administration going to look like, economically speaking. So Trump brought in these tariffs as really a key marquee kind of approach to the economics of this country, particularly around trade. And he was arguing that under his emergency powers that he was able to do this. And of course, that was challenged legally in the courts. The outcome of this case, people had speculated whether or not the Supreme Court would uphold these tariffs, really looking at kind of the Q&A during oral argument and coming out with thinking that they could have potentially be struck down. So I'd imagine that this is really going to be a shift, I think, in Trump's economic policy, and certainly the administration would view this as a setback to their agenda.
What do you think that reaction is going to be like from President Trump? I have to imagine he's watching this and he is not too happy, considering he described it essentially as life or death.
Right. So this, as I mentioned, is a big part of his agenda in his second term. And I imagine we were going to hear a lot about this from the White House, and certainly going to be hearing a lot about this next week in the State of the Union. And so one of the things that we are kind of watching here is not just the politics of it, but maybe the also kind of the Democratic reaction and how they are viewing this as a political win and something that they can run on. Interestingly, you know, within the last few election cycles, affordability and economics has become such a huge part of the national dialogue going on in the United States, particularly around prices. And those who were opponent of the tariffs were saying this was in fact harming the ability of the American consumers' purchase power. Again, Trump said that this was about accountability and trade imbalance. And so this was certainly a major political issue and a major economic issue for both political parties.
One thing that's interesting is we normally get, and saying normal might not be the best verbiage there, but we always talk about the Supreme Court rulings, and we have some big ones that come out maybe toward the end of June when everything's kind of coming to an end there. What do you make of the fact that this ruling came down and it's the end of February? We're talking months before the end of the Supreme Court's calendar, so to speak.
Well, I think it just is an indicator of just the significance of the case, and the case did have a certain timeliness to it that had been part of the discussion. I mean, this really does impact the Trump agenda in a way that is significant. And also impacts the economy that's significant. Now, what'll be interesting in light of this is to see how trade goes forward, and also how does Trump pivot, politically around the issue of trade and specifically around these trade deficits. I mean, this had really amped up a lot of the political tensions internationally between the United States and China and also with other countries. And so, again, how Trump reacts to it, I think, one, he's going to be critical of this decision, but there's got to be a pivot point also on the economic agenda going forward.
And it's interesting because we were expecting to actually hear from President Trump as he was speaking to the governors. He's actually speaking behind closed doors right now there in the White House. So we'll talk more about that in a second. Cayce Myers, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know you got to go. Anything else you want to add before you go?
This could not be, I think, more significant of an opinion. I mean, we oftentimes hear about Supreme Court opinions and those kind of conservative, liberal breakdowns in court decisions. And this is one where I think has real political implications, not only for the administration, but also for the 2026 midterms coming up. And we're going to hear a lot more about this in the coming months.
All right. Cayce Myers there at Virginia Tech. Thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And if you are just joining us here, my name is Josh Breslow, and we are covering a big breaking story as the Supreme Court has now struck down President Trump's tariffs, those sweeping tariffs, and we have been waiting on this ruling. We know we've been told several times that as the opinions come down, there could potentially be one on the tariffs. However, today kind of popped up on us here at 10 a.m. As they release the rulings. Sometimes they kind of release more than one, but it appears right now the big one, of course, is that Supreme Court ruling on President Trump's tariffs. Want to pop up a live look right now. This is over the Supreme Court building, as it looks like a few more people have kind of shown up there outside of the court. That is, of course, the High Court. At this hour here, if you are just joining us, I want to go over just some of what we know so far. Again, the Supreme Court striking down President Trump's far-reaching global tariffs, handing him a significant loss on an issue crucial to his economic agenda. That 6-3 decision centers on tariffs that are imposed under an emergency powers law, including the sweeping, quote-unquote, reciprocal tariffs that he levied on nearly every other country. It's the first major piece of Trump's broad agenda to come squarely before the High Court, which he helped to shape, as I mentioned, with the appointments of 3 conservative jurists during his first term in office. The majority found that the Constitution, quote, very clearly gives Congress the power to impose taxes, which include tariffs. Quote, the framers did not vest any part of the taxing power in the executive branch. That is according to Chief Justice John Roberts, who wrote that. Now, we know Justices Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, and Brett Kavanaugh actually dissented on this opinion. Again, we are talking about a 6-3 opinion that came down just about 30 minutes ago. And if you have been watching us here, again, as I mentioned, we do have a look at that opinion as it came out. You can see quite a few pages that we are going through at this hour to kind of piece it all together and find out more of the quotes that came in. Of course, we just brought you the one from Chief Justice Roberts there, but there's a lot to this. So, again, we are kind of sifting through it to pull out the portions of it, and we're actually going to have more experts that will join us here in just a bit to break down kind of the sections of this that stand out to them. We're talking legal experts as well as political experts to talk about what happens next, but also the impact here on President Trump and his economic agenda. Also important to note, this is all happening less than a week before the State of the Union address. We're also checking in with President Trump on Truth Social, expecting that we will get a reaction from him in the coming moments. Phil Stewart posting this, saying U.S. Supreme Court rules against Trump's global tariffs enacted under a federal law meant for national emergencies. As you can tell, we are tossing out the brakes at this hour as we try to piece everything together. Want to make sure that we bring you all of the developments as soon as we get them. Now, Brett Kavanaugh actually saying tariff refunds would likely be a mess. And that is one of the questions that we have for our experts here, which is what we can expect as far as where this goes, if there are going to have to be tariff refunds or if this starts from now. We also have reaction pouring in as New York Attorney General Letitia James says the United States Supreme Court has ruled in our favor and declared that the president's sweeping tariffs are illegal. This is a major victory for our families and businesses in New York and across our nation. We will never stop fighting to protect people and the rule of law. And if you are just joining us, as I mentioned, we're going to get all kinds of reaction coming in, and we are checking with President Trump and his Truth Social. I'm popping it up and refreshing it here to see what kind of reaction we're going to get. Now, important to note, his last post was about 2 hours ago. As he said, the Democrat shutdown cost the USA at least 2 points in GDP. That's why they are doing it in mini form again. No shutdowns. Also, lower interest rates, quote unquote, too late Powell is the worst. Again, that is the last post that we saw from President Trump on his Truth Social. Gavin Newsom here, California's governor, posting even Donald Trump's Supreme Court agrees his tax on the American people is illegal. A huge win for families and small businesses across the country who have been suffering under this man's ego. As you probably noticed, a lot of the reaction that's coming in so far is actually from the Democrat side. We're going to keep you updated and bring you reaction from both sides of the aisle as lawmakers and different leaders across the country are expected to kind of sound off on this as we get additional information. I want to pop this up really quickly right here once again because we are keeping an eye on the stock market to see how it's going to react to this Supreme Court ruling. Now, the ruling came out at 10 o'clock, and as you can see, the stock market opened 9:30 as it always does. Now, it started off the day in the red, but about 10 o'clock there, as the ruling came down, you can see the Dow actually popped up into the green, up right now about 0.26% or 124 points. So as of right now, it does appear that the stock market is reacting positively to the news from the Supreme Court. We're going to keep an eye on the stock market as we always do and keep it posted here on Live Now from Fox. And if you are just joining us, you are once again taking a live look outside of the Supreme Court building. We will continue to bring in different guests here to break down what all of this means and what happens next. As I mentioned, we had a lot of different Democrats who were sounding off, but we're also hearing from Republican lawmakers. This is Rand Paul, who says, in defense of our republic, the Supreme Court struck down using emergency powers to enact taxes. This ruling will also prevent a future president, such as AOC, from using emergency powers to enact socialism. Interesting, Rand Paul's mention of AOC in that post, but essentially saying that it also prevents them from using emergency powers to enact socialism. And we should have an expert joining us pretty soon here to break down the legal implications of all of this as we work to see what could happen next. That is, of course, the big question after we learned just about 30 minutes ago that the Supreme Court struck down President Trump's far-reaching global tariffs, handing him a significant loss on an issue crucial to his economic agenda. That 6-3 decision centers on the tariffs imposed under that emergency powers law, including the sweeping reciprocal tariffs that he levied on nearly every other country.
Yeah. Josh, we're going to get you Cayce because Jeremy's taking long. I apologize, but we're working to get you him right
All right. As I mentioned here, we are having several different producers here. They are kind of combing through all of those documents as we continue to look through it. Again, if you are just joining us here, the Supreme Court striking down President Trump's sweeping tariffs there. And the question becomes, what happens next? But we are talking a huge document, not quite as long as we've seen with some of the other decisions that have come down. But as you can see, they're still pretty lengthy. This is a 6-3 court decision, so we're going to have experts joining us from a legal angle as well as a political aspect to explain what this could mean. But also, again, the big question here, what is the next step in all of this for President Trump? We are keeping an eye on his Truth Social. We have not heard from him just yet. Important to note, though, a bit earlier on this morning, we were inside of the White House as President Trump was meeting with governors from all over the country. That's happening right now behind closed doors. So I would imagine someone has gone in to let him know about this, but that could be a reason why we are not seeing anything just yet on Truth Social as this decision has come down.